Welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. My name is Michael LeBlanc, and I am your host. This podcast is produced in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Meet Chief Strategy Officer and now author, Chelsey as she takes us through her experience accelerating business cultures for long-term success, articulated in her fabulous new book, The Culture Climb, How to Build a Work Culture that Maximizes Your Impact. Let's listen in now. Chelsey, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this morning?
I am doing awesome. How are you doing, Michael?
Fantastic. Now, you and I have come to know each other through the RSPA, Retail Solutions Provider Association, and you've written a book, and you're a fascinating person, so thank you for joining me on the podcast. It's great to have you on board.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
Where am I finding you this morning?
I am in the beautiful city of Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Nice. Now, are you born and raised in Minneapolis? How did you wind up there?
Born and raised in northern Minnesota, and then made my way down to Minneapolis for college. Went to the University of Minnesota and fell in love with the area and the active city and the arts and the music scene, the food scene, everything that is the city of Minneapolis. And so I stayed here after I graduated.
I hear great things about the city. Now, when I think of Minneapolis in a retail context, I think of Target and I think of Best Buy. Am I missing anyone? Is there anyone else that I should be thinking of in a city like yours? Of course, your company, but from a retail perspective, anybody I'm missing?
No, from a retail perspective, those are the big ones. We have a lot of large corporations here. General Mills is here. 3M was started here. We have, of course, like you said, Target and Best Buy. So a lot of big corporations are in this area. But from a retail perspective, you got them.
Fantastic. Well, listen, we've kind of jumped right in, but let's take a step back. Tell the listeners a bit about yourself. Who are you, your personal professional journey, and what you do for a living?
Yeah, wonderful. So I started my professional journey in the world of human resources. And my dad, when I started in HR, he was very concerned. He said, "Why would you ever want to go into human resources?" And his origination was in sales and kind of worked his way up through the organization. And he always felt like I would be a great sales representative. I said, you know what? I love being, with people, and I love helping, just growing and developing people and just really trying to make improvements in areas. And I just felt like HR was going to be a great fit for that. And so I was in HR for about 15 years, worked my way up through a variety of positions, and was very fortunate to be in an organization, North Country Business Products, who's been an active member of the RSPA for decades. In an organization that really valued HR, allowed HR to have a seat at the table. So we've always been in the board meetings, we've been in the strategy sessions, and we were able to really contribute at the highest level from the very beginning of my HR career. And I think that really set me on the trajectory for the rest of my career up until this point, because it gave me insights that a lot of times HR leaders aren't able to have. So through that, we went through some CEO transitions. My dad was the CEO for a very long time. We were an employee-owned organization, and so we had a very unique culture while we were at North Country as well. And as he was retiring, I was in charge of finding his replacement. And we did not have anyone internally that was ready to kind of take over the helm. And so we had to go to the outside. Brought someone in from the outside, put him through all of the different things we could put him through. It was like 28 hours of interviewing, psychological testing, leadership assessments, the whole 9 yards. And we thought we made the right hire. Turns out we did not make the right hire. And so we ended up having to let him go. And in the meantime, while he was there, it was just under 3 years, completely just drove the culture into the ground, drove our business into the ground from a financial standpoint. And we had to really reinvent our organization, reinvent our culture, revitalize our culture, rebuild trust and collaboration from the ground up. And so it took about 3 years to really make this transition. And I tell you all of that because that's what brought me to where I'm at today. And we'll talk about the book later on, but that's one of the reasons why I wanted to write the book about culture, because it is so important to an organization. And that was really my eye-opening experience and real-world experience to see what it feels like to be in a culture that is has low trust, low collaboration, low communication, silos throughout the organization, and it didn't feel good. And once we were able to get it back up to where it was supposed to be, the company succeeded, and we were able to see the results from a financial perspective, from a profitability perspective, and of course from a human perspective in the organization as well. So that's really what kind of got me on my road to where I'm at. And now from a Keystone Group, we do 3 different things. We do business strategy, culture revitalization and culture revolution, and then leadership growth and development. And again, these are all things I learned and really started to love when I was at North Country. And so now I get to do that every day, which is really, really fun for me.
I want to follow a couple threads. So many questions. Great. I was reflecting on I was listening to your description of what happened at the business. And I think a lot about succession these days, not just because I'm a big fan of the TV show, but because I had the opportunity to speak to some global leaders in succession. And then I watched what happened at Disney, right? Where, you had, and it's happened before, right? It's happened at GE where this big process to find the successor and groom someone to position them to take over. And then it doesn't always work. What lessons did you learn about succession? You mentioned there wasn't anybody that you'd built in the company that was ready to take over. If you had to do it all over again, would you put more emphasis on that? Or do you think it's a mix of luck and planning? Or can you really fold that into a strategic HR plan? And I feel like it deserves more time than it gets in many businesses. What do you think?
Yeah, and we started 10 years before my dad was ready to retire. It was a 10-year succession plan. And there was 3 of our top executives that were going to be exiting about the same time. And we did a really good job having a succession plan for the other 2 positions, VP of Finance and then a VP of Sales. And we just didn't have anyone who was ready to take the reins as the CEO. Very unique position, obviously, different set of skill sets and mindsets and all of that. So we put everything that we could into leveling up people and seeing who was going to kind of rise to the top. Yeah. So I don't know from our perspective. I mean, maybe we could have brought in other people at a higher level and tried to give them some opportunities to rise to the top as well. But it takes a lot of time to grow and develop people. And then what I didn't mention is, so we had that CEO in from the outside for 3 years. And then once we let him go, we did feel there were people internally who were ready to take over. And so we had 3 people internally who applied for the CEO role at that point, and one who got it and still remains as the CEO today. And so we did have some success, and he wasn't, obviously he had never been a CEO before. He had grown up in the organization, had been there for, at that point, 15, 16 years, and had gained the trust, had gained the respect. And so you asked what I learned, and the biggest thing I learned is that culture matters. And if people do not trust the leader, and if they do not respect the leader, you're not going to have success. And so that was the biggest learning, is that, as long as this person is a culture fit and the organization trusts them and they have the desire to learn and grow, right? And they know that they don't know everything and that they have a lot to learn, then they're going to have a lot more chances of succeeding than someone who doesn't have that respect and trust within the organization.
Well, it certainly comes up in the book, and the foundation of your model is conscious leadership, right? Knowing what you're strong at and being aware. So we'll get to that and talking about the book. I want to learn a little bit more about the Keystone Group International. So you've told me a little bit about it, but what's scale and scope and what are your typical clients and talk about how you're involved with the RSPA. We're both involved with great organization, but touch on a few of those things for me.
Yeah, absolutely. So Keystone Group was started about 10 years ago. Jamie Tates is our founder and CEO, and she had worked at Cargill, which is I think it is the largest privately held organization. And she experienced large corporate, obviously, in that role, and she wanted to take her learnings and bring it to smaller organizations to help them grow and succeed in the ways that they want to. So that's why she started it. And so now today we are really continuing to live out that vision of hers. And she's a true visionary. She has done a great job setting that vision for our organization. And so we work with small to mid-sized businesses, which for us, that means anywhere from 50 million to 5 billion. So it's a huge range, but that's where our clients tend to be in. And it's really focused on what does the business need and what do the humans need. There's a lot of strategists out there that come in and help businesses set their strategy, which is great. Every company needs a strategy for their business, but what we found was missing, and that's how we started as well. We started with helping businesses set and then execute on their business strategy. And what we found over the years is that we also need to have a human strategy. And if we're not focusing on what do the humans need in our business, we're never going to hit those strategic goals. Or if we do hit those strategic goals, we're not going to stay there very long. Or at some point, we're going to hit a plateau and not be able to kind of break through that ceiling that people inevitably hit. And so our focus over the last really 5 years has been more, we still do the business strategy because you have to have that, but our focus has really been on what is culture? How do you define it? How do you grow it? How do you assess it to know where you're at today? And then really create a roadmap or a culture compass of where you want your culture to be. And then through that work, we found, often our leaders are not capable of taking our business where we need it to get to, or maybe they're capable on the business side, but not the human side. So really leveling up the leaders in our organizations has been a huge focus for us, as leaders really are the ceiling to your organization. And John Maxwell has a book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. And one of his laws is called the law of the lid, meaning that your leaders are the lid of your company. And so if you rate your leaders a 5 out of 10, then your company's never going to be able to level up above a 4.
Right.
But if we can continue leveling up our leaders, we can continue leveling up our teams and our organization. And so that's our kind of holistic approach of business needs and human needs.
And I guess it builds on, Peter Drucker's quote, right? The culture eats strategy for breakfast. In other words, you can have all the strategy you want, but if you don't have the right culture in place, you're kind of doomed, basically. Let's talk before we jump into the book. Let's talk a little bit about our lives today. And I do. It's not a history lesson kind of podcast, and the COVID era is what it is, but it probably had a pretty big impact on the way we work, right? And it may be irrevocable. I very rarely say never be the same again, because I'm usually proved wrong. But many people are doing all kinds of different things that I think have a material impact on how you think about building culture, working from home, flexible hours, maybe remote working, maybe working in different countries, none of which is particularly new. I mean, people have been running remote teams for a long time, but it does seem now part of the work culture, at least in North America. So, we're even talking about things like 4-day weeks, right? Longer days, 1 day off, and it seems very successful. How do you, reflecting on everything that's happened, and how do you reflect on this? Is it now easier or harder to build culture? Do you need to be more thoughtful? Talk about that for a few minutes.
Well, I think there's a couple components to this. And one is that, yes, there's the visible changes like remote working, right? You can work from anywhere, 4-day work weeks, things like that. And it definitely, separation is difficult. It makes building culture a lot more challenging, not impossible, but it makes it a lot more challenging. But what I feel has been, it has been discussed, but maybe not to the depth that it needs to be, is the less visible changes, like the emotional and mental states of a lot of people. And I mean, some of them are still, COVID after effects and things that had happened throughout COVID. But also, I think just the pace of change that we're in today, the amount that every human being is juggling on any given day is substantial. And then I also think this new world of everything is remote, and we can have Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting after Zoom meeting. We're having 1 week's worth of meetings in one day. Right? Because you had to allow time for travel before. And so you'd have maybe 2 or 3 meetings a day. And now we're having, 6, 7, 8 meetings in one day, which just allows, that much more work that has to be done, that much more follow-up, that many more emails that need to be read. And so I think it's just this state of chaos and just feeling overwhelmed all the time. And I think that is one of the biggest things that's impacting culture today, and the need to understand that and how do we manage that. So that's where I think the flexibility and the hybrid working environments are a really great thing to allow people to work where they work best. And sometimes that's in the office, and sometimes that's remotely, and sometimes that's from their cabin up on the lake, right? It can be a lot of different things, which is great. But from a culture perspective, if we're not together in the same building, in the same office, ever or infrequently, we need to be a lot more intentional about our culture. We need to be a lot more intentional about the conversations that we're having and really reimagining what our culture looks like, what it feels like, how do we celebrate, how do we recognize people, how do we promote people, like all of these concepts of culture just need to be reimagined and really revolutionizing the way that we think about culture and how we are going to impact it. Every employee, every leader, every leadership team needs to be thinking about what does this mean for my organization and how are we going to continue to grow and develop this in this new world? And we can't just keep doing it the same way we've been doing it, because that's not going to bring us into the future.
I've talked to retail leaders who say, listen, and it's one of these things that takes time to adjust, right? So I'll give you an example. So leases don't suddenly go away. Office space doesn't suddenly go away, but it will. In other words, we're starting to get to a point where retail leaders of all businesses are making decisions about how much physical space they need, which on the one hand has some economic benefits because, hey, I used to need to spend X amount. Now I need to spend Y. Do you recommend, or when you look around to seeing who's building culture best, and let's call it a new environment, is it taking those funds, not throwing them to the bottom line necessarily, but investing them in culture? In other words, where we have less office space, but we're going to go to more conferences together, and we're going to book a day once we're at the conference to be together. Is that an example of let's call it a best practice, or do you see that evolving as a best practice? Talk about that for a bit.
Absolutely. I think having these get-togethers, whether it be tacking it onto a conference, which is a really great idea. I have a client that is doing that next month, and they have a conference they're going to for 3 days, and then they each have a day to kind of do their own thing. And then they have a day where they're doing team building stuff, and they're going out to different events.
A catch-up day. I like that, like a catch-up day after the conference, right? So you're not 4 days back to back. You catch up with work, and then, that's interesting.
Yep. I know. So I thought that was great. And then other organizations are very intentional about their all company get-togethers. So depending on how large the company is, maybe it's just an all team or all department get-together, but being really intentional about those events and when and how you're bringing people together and what are you doing when you're together, right? It's not just about, okay, let's figure out X, Y, and Z and solve these issues. It's no, we need to have some time just to be and to hang out and to, break bread together. I think that's one of the most important things we can do is to have that casual, just being with one another is a really important part of building culture. But then also being able to have kind of those hard conversations, right? Because hard conversations are better done in person. And so being really thoughtful about any interaction and communication we're having, and really, just like you're saying, spending those dollars that we were maybe using elsewhere and putting them into how can we better and more frequently and more intentionally interact with one another. And what does that look like for this team, for this department, or for our whole organization?
Let's talk about another element of development that certainly blossomed by force, so to speak, by necessity in the beginning of COVID, and that was agility. And I'm sure when you're talking to leaders today, you've described a pace of change and just a pace of work and how it's changing. That if you and I were having this conversation 20 years ago, it would the winners would be the long-term planning, the General Electric, GE kind of big written 10-year strategic plans. And boy, that leads to great success. Now it feels like, this culture from Silicon Valley of the minimal viable product, and let's be more agile, that agility trumps long-term strategic planning. How do you think of that in the strategic planning element of your thinking and of the business?
Yeah, you're right. We have a lot of clients who used to do 10-year strategic plans, and specifically our technology clients have said, there's no way. This was even 5-10 years ago. They're like, there's no way we could plan out 10 years. How would we ever do that? And so now we see almost all of our clients, some of them will do a 5-year strategic plan, high level, kind of more of a vision of where we're going versus a strategic plan. But really, a lot of our clients are focusing on what's our 3-year plan? And then actually, I know you've had the author of the CEO Excellence book on, and they talk about the concept of stagility. And that's something that we've really just embodied and taken with us, which they define that as being what part is our core and what's going to remain stable over time, but then what are the components that can be agile. And so knowing that we're going to set a 3-year plan, but there's components of that are inevitably going to need to be modified as time goes on. And, the way that we work with clients is, yes, we need a 3-year plan. What's our annual plan? And then let's break that into quarterly objectives. And so what are we going to get done in the next 90 days? What are the most important things we're going to get done in the next 90 days? Most of those things ladder up to our annual goals, but a lot of times they don't, because we need to be agile. We need to focus on other things that present themselves because of the pace of change. And so if leaders aren't open, some leaders say, "Oh, this is our budget, so we have to stick with it," or "These are our goals, and so we have to stick with them." If it doesn't make sense, if it isn't the most important thing, if it's not what's going to move us forward any longer, we need to be open and be agile to changing that.
And there has to be some humility in that, I feel.
Yes.
Right? I mean, there's a lot tied up in putting a plan together and then not even admitting, but kind of revisiting the plan and say, "Hey, we thought this 3 months ago. It doesn't look like it's happening that way." So there has to be a fair dose of humility. And I think that worries people, that it is seen as a shortcoming in their perhaps career advancement. How do you get across that?
I do. And, we talk about the concept of failing fast, and it's okay. And it has to be a part of culture. And it is a part of culture, whether it's one way or the other. And the whole concept of growth mindset, it needs to be one of those key competencies that our top leaders absolutely must have. But really, every leader, in order to be a leader in an organization, a growth mindset should be one of the requirements, meaning you don't view failure as a negative. You view it as a learning opportunity. And that's just a competency that leaders have to have today.
All right, well, let's talk about your book, The Culture Climb. Congratulations. Writing a book's a big accomplishment with your co-author, Jamie. When you sat down to write the book, the two of you, or however you collaborated to write the book, there's lots of books on leadership, and there's probably a few books on culture, but where did you see a gap on the shelf, so to speak? Where did you, as you thought about you strike me as a very thoughtful person, so you were probably thinking about, okay, we're not just gonna write this book and hope it fits on the shelf somewhere. We have an idea. Talk about that a bit.
Yeah, we felt there was a large gap, and we don't have the ability to do as much research and an understanding of the market as our publishers do, but we felt that there was a gap for a book that had a model, a culture model, tools to help you improve culture, and also a how-to guide. We tried to find one because we didn't set out to create our own model. We wanted to find one that we could just say, let's use this with our clients, and we couldn't find one. So that's why we started writing the book, is because we couldn't find anything that really seemed useful, easy to understand, simple to understand how to move forward, not easy on how to build culture, but a simple structure to do so. And then our publisher confirmed this, and they said, this is the only book we could find that has both a model, tools, and a how-to guide. And so it's really was around our passion for culture, the success we've seen in organizations that have really strong leaders who build a really strong culture, and what it does for their organization. We wanted to try to impact as many organizations as possible. And we knew that we couldn't do that, face to face with that many people. And so we wanted to be able to spread this idea and give a handbook to people to say, here's how you can get started to create and build a culture that is intentional and impactful in your organization.
Well, it's a really great book. I wanted to hone in on this, a particular element, the 6 truths that bust common myths. So take us through those as a kind of a highlight of the book, because I found those particularly useful.
Absolutely. So yes, there's 6 areas that we really focus on. The first one is that culture is not any one thing, meaning a lot of times people find culture to be, oh, it's just the fun things. It's the kegerator in the break room, the ping pong table, or it's going to a baseball game or having a barbecue or things like that. Those are important, but that is not culture. And so it is a lot more than just the fun stuff. And it's not just engagement, right? Engagement surveys versus culture surveys are very different things. Culture surveys include engagement, but it goes way beyond how do I feel, what do I think, and talks a lot more about the we in the organization. The second myth is that culture is complicated. People often say, it's is it one thing? Is it two things? No, it's very complicated. Our impact model has 20 building blocks in it, and it's not intended to make it overly complicated. It's intended to help simplify and understand where do we start? Because that was a number one thing we'd hear from clients. Where do we start? And so if you can see, okay, here's the 20 different building blocks that make up culture. Where do we need to focus first? And the third is that culture is not aspirational. Culture is how people are thinking, acting, and interacting in the now. We need to have a vision. We need to have what we call a culture compass of how we want to evolve and grow, but we can't confuse that for that culture is what it is today. And then the fourth is that culture is everyone's responsibility. A lot of times people will say, oh, well, culture is HR's job, or culture is the CEO's job. Culture is a leader's job. Yes, they all have a part in it, a very important part, but really culture falls on everyone's shoulders and everyone has the ability to impact culture positively or negatively. Then the fifth thing is that culture is measurable. A lot of times people say, oh, it's so squishy and nebulous, and how do you ever measure culture? Well, really, our business success or lack thereof is in clear relation to our culture. And so we look at, okay, first you need to understand where's our culture at today, and then measure that year over year. So some sort of a culture assessment, which we provide culture assessments. And so we'll do that year over year. We have a client who we've done this with for 3 years, and we heat map each of the building blocks. So you red, yellow, or green. And this client had 8 or 9 red blocks the very first year. And then we just did it again at the beginning of this year, and they had 0 red building blocks, and they had a lot more greens and then a handful of yellows. And so just being able to see that visually was so impactful for the team and the whole organization. But you can also measure productivity.
Was that correlating to business success, either inversely or positively?
Absolutely. So their profitability and their revenues tripled over those 3 years. Their employee numbers doubled. So yes, they saw tremendous success as an organization. I mean, you can look at productivity, attendance, profitability, hitting your metrics and goals, turnover, retention, right? These are all things that can help measure culture. But there's not just one thing you can use to measure, which often go like, well, what's that one metric? Well, there isn't just one metric because culture is a lot more complicated than that. And then the last truth is that culture requires patience and evolution. And so, like I said, there's 20 building blocks. You can't fix everything at once. You have to prioritize it. And where do we have the most opportunity for growth and development? Start there, and then just keep working your way up. As I mentioned, it took 3 years in my previous job my previous organization to bring that culture and revitalize that culture back to what it used to be. And that you're never done. We talked about the pace of change today. It's the same within our culture. And if we're not continuously evolving and growing our culture, we're not going to be able to keep up with the pace of change. And so we need to, as a business and other humans, make sure that we're continually evolving and growing.
I was having this conversation on the weekend with someone about the difference between objective and subjective reality. And I was thinking about our discussion today around trust, because trust is one of the big parts of the foundation that you build. I mean, even stepping outside the workplace, it feels like it's harder these days. I don't know if you feel the same, to figure out what is objective reality. And objective reality sometimes can be a big platform for building trust with each other. How do you, with an environment surrounding us where sometimes we don't know which side is up some days, how do you think about that when you bring a trust to the workplace?
Yeah. When we do a lot of discussions and leadership growth and building around trust. And what we always tell the leaders is that everyone's perception is their reality. And so to your point of, what's objective it's very difficult because everyone has their own perception of everything, and their what they see is their reality. And so what we talk about with trust is that it's really about relationships, and it is built very slowly, and it's by having really honest, open conversations. It's about showing up for one another. It's about following through on what you said you were going to do. It's about being consistent. It's about showing that you care, right? So again, it's not just one thing that leaders and employees need to do to build and gain that trust. It's a lot of things, and it has to be consistent. And again, we go back to one of your original questions about, the remote work environment. This makes it even more difficult, and we have to be even more intentional about having authentic one-on-one conversations with our employees and asking, how are you really doing, right? Not just the obligatory passing in the hallway, how are you conversations. No, how are you really doing?
Yeah. Interesting. Well, listen, it's such a great conversation, and it's a great book available, available where everyone would enjoy buying their books today. Well, what about you? How do we get a hold of you? Are you a LinkedIn person? What's the best way to learn more about both yourself, Keystone Group, maybe even get in touch?
Absolutely. Yes. I am very active on LinkedIn. So just Chelsey Paulson on LinkedIn. We can put that link in the show notes. And then Keystone Group International, also very active on LinkedIn and Instagram. TheCultureClimb.com is a great spot to go to learn more about the book. We also have free tools that you can download and a free assessment you can download from our website. So I definitely encourage people to go to TheCultureClimb.com. And then KeystoneGroupInternational.com is our website. And so there's a lot more information about us and the services that we offer there.
Well, fantastic. We'll put all that in the show notes. But Chelsey, listen, thanks so much for joining me here on the Voice of Retail podcast. It's a real treat to dive into the book and how you think about both strategy and culture. Great discussion. I wish you and Keystone Group much continued success, and I look forward to seeing you again real soon.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, be sure and follow on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically each week. And be sure to check out my other retail industry media properties, Remarkable Retail Podcast with Steve Dennis, and the Global E-Commerce Leaders Podcast. Last but not least, if you're into barbecue, check out my YouTube barbecue show, Last Request Barbecue, with new episodes each and every week. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, consumer growth consultant, president of Emmy LeBlanc and Company, Inc., Maven Media, and keynote speaker. If you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at meleblanc.co. Safe travels, everyone.